Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how my cancer came about and maybe some lessons that you could learn about living with a chronic illness. So if you've struggled with a chronic condition that shapes your daily life, then you possibly know the journey, the setbacks and the small victories that you can have when you're trying to manage things yourself, even with help from your doctors, the NHS, consultants, etc. So for me, living with ulcerative colitis for over half my life, it taught me that you've got to have patience, you've got to have some resilience, and you have to be your own health advocate, because whilst we all like to think that the doctors, the consultants, the professors, they have all the answers, unfortunately, reality is they don't. And a lot of times it's very much a case of they will try something for you and see how it goes, which kind of ties into how I'm looking at treating my cancer with metabolic therapy, because if medical professionals had all the answers, people wouldn't still be dying from cancer. And so whilst I know they always do their best and they will always prescribe whatever it is that is what they feel is the best for the patient, it doesn't always work. And the same would be true for metabolic therapy. If you can't get it right and you can't do everything you need to do, that may not work either. So basically being your own health advocate means that you have to do a lot of research. You try things out on yourself, you see how it goes, you see how you feel. And if it doesn't work, you move on. If it does work, you try and tweak it, refine it, make it even better. So these skills really became crucial when facing cancer and navigating alternative treatment options, because even if I believed the medical professionals knew everything, which they obviously do not, they're only allowed to prescribe what they're allowed to prescribe. And for me, that really wasn't an option. But it also gives you some insights into what you're not being told. So my nearly 30 odd years, I guess, of journey through managing ulcerative colitis, and now some of that experience, or potentially a lot of that experience, is helping me face dealing with cancer with clarity and with hope. So I'm very early on in my journey into treating my cancer. But early on in my ulcerative colitis, it took years for me to find stuff that started working. I remember once I actually got the diagnosis to say that it was an autoimmune condition, so they actually figured out that it was ulcerative colitis. That was many years after I first got the general irritable bowel disease sort of general diagnosis. And so they started trying me on all of the standard treatments. There's this series of drugs are in a category called 5-ASAs. And I remember the first one was called azathioprine, I think it was. And so I tried that and I was on it for a few weeks. And then all of a sudden I got really, really ill. I was throwing up, I was getting major bouts of diarrhea. I didn't feel well at all. At one point I even passed out while I was going to the loo, and I was taken to the hospital, and it was actually found that my white cell count had taken a nosedive. It should have been being monitored, but it wasn't. It's a mistake on the practice's part that prescribed it. There was a consultant in my local hospital, but one of the checks that they should have been doing wasn't, and as a result I got an infection and needed blood transfusion, and it turns out that I was actually allergic to the whole group of 5-ASAs. There was another one they tried, it was called 6-mercaptopurine, which was another, I believe it's similar to that 5-ASA group. But again, I was allergic to it, didn't help, just made me feel ill. And so even though it was standard practice to prescribe those kinds of drugs, they really didn't know whether or not I was going to respond positively or not until they actually tried them. And having spoken to other people with similar conditions, it does seem to be the thing that they really don't know. You would imagine that they could just take some blood, do some tests, do some biopsies maybe, go and do all their sciencey type stuff in the labs and come back and say, right, this is what's going to help you. But no, it's very much a case of suck it and see. And I feel that the way that the NHS approaches cancer isn't quite as ad hoc as that. They do biopsy cancers and they gene type it and they figure out quite a lot about it to see which drugs potentially could work the best. But I've found privately that there are far more extensive tests that you can get done if you've got the money to pay for it, that will really give you some deep insights into your cancer and what will work for it in terms of treating it. But that's just not part of the NHS. You don't get that kind of treatment. So for me, it's one of those things that, given my experience with the trial and error, suck it and see approach, that when I was given a single option for treatment on my particular cancer and the circumstances around it, I didn't believe that was the only way, because experience told me that from treating my ulcerative colitis in the past, that there are many different possibilities. And so that's how I eventually came across metabolic therapy, the whole idea of treating cancer as a metabolic disease and attacking it at its core weaknesses. And so with a bit of persistence, with a bit of trial and error on the protocol that I've chosen to treat my cancer, I'm rather of the opinion that I may not get it right 100% on the first time. I may need additional parts of the protocol. Maybe I'll need IVC, maybe I'll need HBOT, maybe I'll need infrared therapy, maybe I'll need hydrogen therapy. All of these things are possible, and all of these things are expensive, which is why, as you know, I've started the GoFundMe. But to get started, there's every possibility that, from the research that I've done, from the collection of supplements and off-labels that I've chosen to treat my cancer, I could get it right first time. Who knows? We'll find out in a few months' time. But speaking up, asking questions, finding out what the risks are, getting more in-depth explanations about why you're being offered what you're offered, is what I've learnt that is absolutely necessary when you're dealing with the NHS, because as much as the doctors are there to help us, to heal us, they don't have all the answers. They really don't. I know we like to think they should, but in my experience, that's just not the case. And I'm not blaming anybody for that. I don't think it's a fault necessarily. If anything, it's a fault of the system. But in terms of frustration of being given the drug in the early days, and then realising that basically it was just trial and error, just throw a load of drugs at it and see what works. I kind of feel like now that it's come to something like cancer, which is a lot more serious, I can't take that approach and just like the one and done operation that is, if you've watched my previous videos, it's quality of life altering operation that you cannot reverse. There's no going back once you've done that. I just can't accept that as the only option at this stage. So that's pretty much, I think, my take on what we should be doing, in as much as, yes, we should seek help from professionals as soon as we've got a problem, as soon as we know there's a major issue, we should listen to their advice. But it's my opinion that we need to be more responsible for our own health and our own treatment, and looking into what's available. Even if you chose to use metabolic therapy, for example, as an adjunctive treatment along with whatever else was prescribed by your oncologist, by your medical team, I still think you'd be better off. But they will never offer that to you as an option, as part of the standard of care. And so, it's my opinion as somebody who's going through that, making that decision now, that people should basically take their care into their own hands to a certain degree, even if it's only to confirm that what they're being offered is best for them, which in my case, it definitely wasn't, in my opinion. At this point, I would just like to say I'm not a medical professional, I am not a doctor or a scientist, I have no degrees, but I think it is fair to say that I've done enough research that I know what is the best decision for me, and what was being offered by the NHS wasn't the best for me. So in terms of how I came to ultimately get my ulcerative colitis under control, it was the end of the trial and error process. After several drugs over many years, we did actually find a couple that worked, some for short term, others for slightly longer term. And now I'm basically at the point where the drug that I was on, it was one called tofacitinib. It's an artificial JAK inhibitor, which it basically suppresses the immune system a little bit, or a lot of it, however you want to look at it. But it didn't do enough to prevent cancer coming about. And I've now had to stop taking it because there was a trial where a few of the candidates actually found that it sped up the process of the cancer growing. And so I've had to stop that now. So there is a risk that in time my inflammation could get worse again. So really, I've got a couple of clocks ticking. One is for the cancer just doing its thing, spreading, metastasizing. The other is inflammation could come back in a few months, 6 months, a year, who knows, could start getting flare-ups again. And so, I really need to get this cancer under control as soon as I possibly can. So even though my UC was as managed and as calm as it ever had been in a very long time, the drugs that were doing that for me are now gone. The protocol that I'm using is a proven or recognised protocol from any medical professionals anywhere in the world. And ultimately, I am using it as a way to hopefully heal myself without any support from the NHS. So this is where I find myself. It's great that I've got the information to hand, and it's great that you've got a community of people to help support me and cheer me along. But it would be nice to think that the NHS would be more invested in the path that I've chosen, to even help me, even if it was just monitoring blood levels, potential toxicities that might come about of my chosen protocol. But nope, they're not allowed to do that either. So I think this is where the story ends in terms of what can the NHS do for me. It's a shame, I feel, but that's the reality of the situation that I find myself in. So as ever, if you feel like this has been any help to you at all, please do feel free to share my story. That would be obviously very helpful. Comment below if you've got any questions. I'll happily answer them, and hopefully I'll see you about for the next update. So have a good rest of your day. Take care, and goodbye for now.